session is going to be about predictive fiction and at times how fiction can predict what happens in real life, in the world, in society. We do know about some sort of predictive fiction, if we call it fiction, of fortune telling. That was Nostradamus, is one of the most popular names that comes to mind. And there's also science fiction, which was pretty predictive at the time. You had Jules Verne writing about the submarine. You had science fiction authors writing about transplants, cyborgs, the internet. These things have been written about. But what about fiction that writes about crimes that will happen? That's where Ravi comes in. So Ravi, tell me, Ravi's latest book, Don't Tell the Governor, and his previous book have had very uncannily eerie resemblances to what has been happening in our country and which we are all very familiar with. When you write these books, Ravi, do you write it with a sort of crystal ball in front of you? How do these stories come out?
Kiran, no. In fact, I don't think it's a story of a crystal ball or that I actually predict things which happen. In fact, a lot of brouhaha is about people not realizing what's written and what's actually happened. For example, in the previous book that I wrote, In the Name of God, there was the story of a jeweler by the name Nirav Choksi. Now, it just happened that there was a jeweler by the name Nirav Choksi in that particular book. It had no resemblance to any of the scam that Nirav Modi and Mehul Choksi were involved in. But somehow, the entire story became as if Ravi knew the PNB scam much in advance. So if he knew, everybody else should know about it. And the government didn't do anything about it. There was nothing of that sort.
It even went to front page news, I think.
It made news. The book started trending on Twitter. There were people who were talking about it so much. In fact, it became scary at one point in time, looking at the WhatsApp messages we were doing the rounds. But the fact is, every day while writing the book, I would drive back from office to home and I would see this large hoarding in Bandra which had a Nirav Modi ad. So I started writing the story and gave the jeweler the name Nirav Modi. So my wife looked at that and said, "You're going to land up in trouble if you call the guy Nirav Modi in the book." So I then started looking at a surname to change the name from Nirav Modi to something else.
And coincidentally,
I stumbled on Choksi.
Choksi.
So even now you go and do a Google on jeweler names in India and you will actually find a lot of Choksis there. So it's pretty much that which kind of is the genesis of the name Nirav Choksi. No prediction, no prescient behavior, nothing of that sort. It was just that which, it just happened that the entire image of a chapter which describes Nirav Choksi started trending, and then, there were people like, Osaid Owaisi, you have Asuddin Owaisi, you had Vivek Oberoi, you had a few Congress MPs. Everybody tweeting about the book saying, look, he knew about it, nobody else knew about it in the past, so why didn't the government do anything about it? So it's just that people who had not even read the book started talking about it and making it a big story.
Your day job is a banker. So how much of an influence do you think is in the banking circles? There's a lot of gossip that floats around. So how much do you think you draw from that when you're putting your stories together, and how much?
All of it.
All of it.
All of it. In fact, my entire, all the instances which happen in my book are drawn from real life instances. In fact, it's just that if you look at the life of a character in my book, it does not necessarily trail the life of a real life character, real life person. It's just that the happenings which happen in the life of character A would have happened in B, C, D, E, F, 5 different people in real life. So I shamelessly borrow instances from real life and put them into my book, and that's what makes them more relatable. And I tend to believe that the instances which I pick up in real life are the jewels, which through a certain amount of creativity and storytelling, I kind of present to the reader in the form of a well-strung jewelry. That's all. But everything that constitutes my book is pretty much exaggeration of fact. And look, I'm a firm believer in the fact that sometimes a truth can only be told through fiction. And that's why I tell the truth through my stories.
They say that fiction has a greater responsibility to be believable than the truth does. in real life can go as wacky as possible. But when you write fiction, you have to be believable.
Yeah, because today a real life can go in any direction. Take my favorite example, which is your Indrani Mukherjee and that entire saga. If somebody had written about that in a fiction before it really happened, people would say, "What the hell? You know, this is not a story which is believable." But you believe it because now it's happened in real life. While writing fiction, we authors have to be careful that even though we exaggerate instances, even though we think beyond the realms of possibility, we don't go so far that the story becomes completely unbelievable. Whereas God, who's the creator of mankind and things which happen here, does not suffer from any of those delusions, right? He can do whatever he wants and people will still believe him.
Talking about God, and he plays a very important role in your early book on the temple, which was also prescient in a certain way. So how does this happen, Ravi? Do you choose the subjects or do the subjects choose you? Because what you write somehow in some years later it comes to be in the news. In some way or the other, maybe not the exact way that you have written, but in some way or the other that comes into the news. So is it a very keen sense of observation of what is happening and what could happen?
No, I have a logic for that. In fact, if you look at it, okay, let me go back a little bit in time. About 4 years back, I was at a Lit Fest, which was again the Times Lit Fest, and I was with Rakesh Maria on stage. And Rakesh Maria said that criminals are getting a lot more creative these days. It's no longer the time where you just kill somebody, shoot somebody and scoot. It does not work that way. Crime is not walking into a bank and committing a robbery. Criminals are becoming a lot more creative. And when they become a lot more creative, the cops have to start thinking a lot more creatively to catch them. So they can't think of doing something after the act has happened. They have to actually think far in advance and stop the act from happening. Now, we writers are providing that creativity to the cops. We are thinking what could be possible, and then we draw up our stories basis those what could be possible. And that's why, you probably see these things happening. For example, when and two, we authors start speaking the truth. When I was in the earlier session, I was saying the entire ILFS story. Okay, it's a 3-4 year old story. People, you talk about it in the financial services industry. No, everybody would say that ILFS were doomed to go down, right? But nobody did anything about it because everybody, nobody had the courage. When writers write about it, is when they actually start picking up things and then start speaking the truth. Similarly, the RBI governor and the finance ministry squabble. That's pretty much, we have had tens of RBI governors and almost everyone has had a squabble with the RBI governor, with the finance ministry. It's just that nobody had written about them in the form of a story. So when demonetization happened and when the RBI governor stood up and said that, look, I don't, I never agreed to demonetization. And that's when that gave us an idea of a story. And so we wrote about it. It just happened that around the time the book came out, the finance minister and the RBI started getting into real confrontation. But that's, if you look back at it, that's typically the time frame when the honeymoon period for a new RBI governor ends, because he's very close to the end of his tenure, and he starts acting up and creating his own legacy. So Urijit Patel has been on for 2 years, another year to go. RBI governor versus finance ministry battle. It kind of just came to the fore the time the book came out. That's about it. There's nothing prescient about it. It's just that I wrote a story which just happened to come out at that particular time, and the RBI governor and the finance minister together promoted the book.
That's the latest book, Don't Tell the Governor, which is absolutely a gripping read. Speaking of which, there are characters in the book, Don't Tell the Governor, who are, like most of your books, very reminiscent of real life. Of course, there's the RBI governor, as the title says, but there is also a certain film star and a husband. So when you're creating these characters from people who, and they're very clear that they're taken from people from real life, is there some self-censorship that you put in place when you're writing about it because you might anticipate some kind of some trouble in any way?
Well, when I write a story about which is inspired by real life people, then obviously there'll be people who may or may not get offended. But let's face it, Kiran, if you're writing a negative story, Okay, if you're writing criminal activities being performed by some people, and those people take offense to what you've written, they are not going to stand up and say that, look, that's about me. Right? Because the moment they say that, they tend to expose themselves. So it's pretty much, I think, I try not to write about people in a way that they can be identified, but there are always people who speculate and come and ask you, is it so and so, is it so and so? You just have to smile and let them be.
Having said that, now when you write crime, and we did say that real life has a tendency to be much more wicked than anything a writer's imagination can be. So how do you imagine the worst sort of crimes? Your crimes have been basically white-collar crimes, the thrillers that you write. Of course there is the banking background that goes into writing these crimes. Have you ever been tempted to think about another genre of crime to write in?
I tried writing another genre of crime in the name of God, which was a non-banking story. But by and large, no, I think banking is what I know best. Financial crime is what I understand the best. And so I'll probably write a lot based in that particular genre.
And what is your process like? I know that when you're writing thrillers, there's a lot of plotting that is involved because the kind of detailing that goes into every little thing is actually essential to hold the plot together, because even one detail unravels. So I ask this from the perspective of a writer, do you make a skeleton draft outline and plot everything out? Are you an organic writer? How does the process work for you?
I largely am a flow writer in the sense that I don't have the story in front of me. I just have the premise. So, for example, when demonetization happened, it was very clear that that's going to be the plot of or backdrop of my next story. But demonetization in itself couldn't have been the twist in the thriller because it's already happened and people know about it. So something connected to demonetization, but something around demonetization was supposed to be the twist. Now, when you start thinking about demonetization, what comes to your mind? An RBI governor comes to your mind, the finance ministry comes to your mind, fake currency comes to your mind, terrorism comes to your mind, black money comes to your mind. So those become the other elements of the thriller. So I started writing the book, and eventually the key stuff that you have decided upon is, are you going to keep it pertaining to a part of a life of the protagonist, or are you actually going to delve into his personal life? And nobody had written a story about the personal life of an RBI governor. Well, let's face it, like you and me, an RBI governor is a human. Right? He has feelings, he has emotions, he has a family, he may have kids, he may have a love life. So I started writing about those as well, and kind of just juxtaposing that onto the story of demonetization and the other issues that I mentioned. That's how the entire book took shape. So when I start writing the first chapter, and then from there on it goes to the second, to the third, to the fourth. There are times when I get stuck because of a turn in the story that I want to make. I have to go back and rewrite parts of the book, but that's fine, I do that.
And how much of a part does research play in this? Because there is a whole lot of research that goes into it. It is not obvious, but it is very evident that it's very heavily researched. So do you need to have your research in place before you actually write your book, or do you do it on the way?
I research on the go. Pretty much, if I get stuck at a point where I need to know how the RBI interacts with finance ministry, for example, in this book, then I go and speak to a few ex-RBI employees, seniors, figuring out how the information flow happens, how the discussions happen, who says what, and where do those discussions happen. So I actually do a lot of research in terms of talking to people involved in the process rather than anything else. And there are also a lot of books today on the relationship between the government and the regulators. So I read up a lot of those, and internet obviously is the easy tool for research. So these days research is not too difficult, especially if you know the context that you're going to write in.
And when you as an author, but you're also a reader, because being an author also means a reader. What are the crime thrillers that you might have read which you think have been predictive in nature?
Not many. Not many.
So is it
if
a
at all,
niche?
it's luck.
Yeah. So it's a niche that you are sort of putting through, you think?
No, I don't think so. I don't set out to write a predictive crime thriller. No, it doesn't work that way. I set out to tell a good story. If it becomes predictive, then it becomes predictive. But it's not that I set out thinking what can happen 2 years from now and then write a story based on that. No, I don't think anybody can do that.
Yeah. Actually, that is the important point. I think many people must realize that these books take at least 2 years to write, and which is why we are saying that they're predictive, because by the time they come out, what he's talked about in the book is already out. But this has been 2 years in the making, much before the story is already out.
You know, sometimes it's so lucky, it's so eerie that in the previous book particularly, there's part in the story where there's the Padmanabha Swami temple has a lot of gold which is identified, and they actually figure out that about 700 odd pots of gold have been stolen. And they figured that out because in the vaults of the temple they find pots which are numbered, and they're numbered up to some 780 or something. And they find they found a pot outside the vault somewhere in one of the king's room, which is numbered some 1400, 1500 or something. Some 700 odd vaults or odd pots of gold are missing. And that's what I've written in the story. And it's so eerie that the Supreme Court lawyer who was fighting the case has filed an affidavit in the court saying that these are all are missing, and his tally of pots which are missing is about 20 pots away from the number I put in the book. And that's entirely luck. I put some 767 or something. He had put some 789 pots.
Ravi, you have a crystal ball somewhere.
And it's so eerie and it's so scary at times that it's not funny. I again hold it's all luck, nothing more than luck.
I would think more than luck, it is observation, it is research, and it is a keen sense of intuition as to what
every author who writes has to have a keen sense of observation. Without that, you cannot be an author. I think that's what separates you from a normal mortal, a keen sense of observation. But beyond that, you need him to be on his side. I guess I bribed him by putting his name in 3 of my books. So I have a book called If God Was a Banker, then I have a book called God is a Gamer, and a book called In the Name of God. So I think he's been kind to me.
God has been kind to you. So the book about the temple, I think that would have been a tribute to God in a certain way. Religion is like a hotbed of crime, so to speak, and this was one of the aspects. Have you ever felt tempted to explore the other, I would say, the sects and the cults that we have in India, and the crime that does happen there in any work that you do?
It's an interesting space to write in, but I don't understand religion the way a lot of mythology writers in India do. So I would probably find myself inadequate. So I would probably need a lot of work to do there. And I'm very comfortable in my space as a banking and financial services thriller.
I'm going to ask you this. I know you've been asked this before, but does the title John Grisham of Indian banking annoy you?
Yeah, it annoys me. It does annoy me because at some point in time, it becomes a baggage, and 2, it prevents you from stepping out, and 3, come on, yeah, it's unnecessary. It all started with somebody saying that I wanted to be called that. I never said that, but somewhere it kind of just got stuck. Yeah.
What are the kind of books that you write? You like to read?
Because I write thrillers, it just happens that I read a lot of them. I read a lot of James Patterson. I read David Baldacci. I read Lee Child. I read Ashwin Sanghi. And I do read a lot of other murder mysteries, though I'm often accused of reading as if I'm reading an assignment, because I read books very fast, so I'm sitting on the sofa furiously reading or turning the page and wanting to finish the story fast. So I'm often accused by my daughter of reading like a assignment, but yeah, I prefer to read these books.
And when you write crime thrillers, I mean, obviously there's this entire plot narrative and the red herrings and all that you weave into the. What are the specific challenges of this genre of fiction that most readers might not realize when they're reading it? Apart from the pace, maintaining the pace, adding the twists in the plot, adding extraneous characters who you think will go somewhere but go nowhere. Are there any other challenges that you think are very important but are not apparent to the reader?
See, uh, it's never apparent to the reader because writing a thriller or reading a thriller is experiencing the entire package. It's about how fast you read. It's about how fast you feel like going to the next chapter. It's about when you're reading the book at night, you are about to sleep, but you turn the page and see the next chapter is only about 3 pages, and you go to the next chapter, finish it, and then you see the next chapter is only 2.5 pages, and then go to the next chapter. Typically, what happens is if you find a book where we reach the end of a chapter and see the next chapter is 20 pages, you normally shut the book at night and then go to sleep and pick up the next chapter the next day. Now, if we as authors take care of the entire packaging, which is short sentences, easy words, easy plots, a high at the end of every chapter, and leave the reader with no choice but to turn the page at the end of every chapter and continue reading late into the night, and in no time he's halfway through the book, that experience is delivered. To me, delivering that experience book after book is possibly the biggest challenge.
Absolutely, and now more so, I think with the advent of net series on the phone, you're competing so much more with the content available at the touch of a button. So with net series, there is a lot of crime series like Narcos and so many of them. When do you watch them? Do you feel at any point that they would make good stories in the Indian context in any way, any of those?
You're talking of those stories which I think India has a huge. India is so rich in stories. So whether you look at mythology, whether you look at culture, whether you look at crime, whether you look at anything, India has a huge bank of stories, and but which can make into great Netflix and Amazon series. But if you look at those specific series and wonder whether they would be relevant in Indian situation, of course yes. Because we also gone through that phase, we also evolved through that phase and standing where we are today. Narcos, for example, would be as relevant in the Indian context as in the Mexican context. Except that there, people have spoken about it, here nobody really speaks about it. Just imagine where you stay, in the bylanes of Warsaw, a drug lord takes birth and then starts off a story from there and then becomes the drug king of India. A possible story.
Absolutely, and to keep, as you say, whether it is a Netflix series or whether it is a thriller fiction book, to keep the reader hooked to the end and want to turn the next page or want to go to the next episode is the major challenge. So what next from Ravi? What's happening in terms of writing?
I have not yet thought about what's next. I've not even started writing the next book. So possibly 2019 will be a year without a book, and 2020 is when the next one will come out.
Predictive?
I haven't found something to write about, so I don't know.
Shall we throw it open to questions?
How about a murder during a literature festival?
Sounds good.
And then we can, and if 2020 something happens in one of the lit fests, then I'm done.
So now you know what to wait for and to watch for. Ravi is going to write a book about a murder at a lit fest. Any questions?
Oh yeah, not a bad idea. Tollygunge Club is a good setting for a...
And we've got atmosphere too with the atmosphere. Yes, we have a question there, right in the back.
I wanted to ask him, today the politics in Delhi or in India are all also a big thriller. Why not something mixed?
I just want to ask you that politics in India
is also a big thriller now, the way things are moving. So why not a political thriller?
It's a good idea. In fact, if you read my Do Not Tell the Governor, which is just released, it's got elements of a political thriller in it, but not too detailed. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's worth a thought.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
So I think you shouldn't be called John Grisham. Instead, you should be called Indian Banking Nostradamus. Maybe. My question is, if you have been locked in a library, which is where you do not have any thriller books, then which is the genre you will choose to read?
This is the most difficult question I've ever been asked at any.
And I have the answer, but first you give me the answer.
Romance, maybe? I don't know.
No.
I never thought about it.
Okay, so my answer is you will try to find out who locked you and then get out of it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hi Ravi, if you had to write a literary thriller, which fellow author would you put in that particular book? Man, do you want a name?
As a co-author?
No, as a main protagonist in the story. Yeah, so you may repeat the name.
So he's asking a very smart question, okay? No, I'm not going to answer that question simply because I have written a book about an author and his affairs. It's a book called A Bestseller She Wrote. And
what's the name? We don't know the name. Could you just...
The name of the author in the book is Aditya Kapoor. In real life, well, shut down the recording, I'll tell you. Otherwise, I won't. Huh? No, when he pauses the recording, I'll tell you. After
He's
I
already
get off
paused
the stage,
it.
I'll tell you.
He's already paused it. Okay, what's your next project anyways? What are you thinking on the lines of writing any other book different, like you took a break from break into romance? Is there any other break that you plan to take or different genre?
I want to write children's books. So I want to write the first Indian detective series. Hello.
He's wagging his tail, which means it's a yes from his side. And he goes on stage to wish you as well. Thank you so much.
So I want to write the first children's detective series and started work on that. I have already written one booklet, novella in that.
Novella.
So I will not get it published unless I have 3 or 4 of that series ready. So hopefully year after next that will come out.
Talking about children's category, you started a book box, right? Something around that.
Yeah.
How do you think the market for book boxes in India, and do you see a good growth in that market?
People are not willing to pay. You know, sadly in India, people are willing to pay for everything. They'll pay $200, $500 for a pizza, but they will not pay $500 for a book. And I think that's the sad part of it. But things will change, and I'm hoping things change soon.
You being a strategist, I'm sure you'll come up with a smart one, and then it'll all be there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Do we have another question? There were some hands up here in front.
I must say I'm an ardent fan of yours.
Thank you.
I've been reading a lot of your books. They've gone with a banker up. The story she wrote, something.
The bestseller she wrote.
Bestseller she wrote. So, and they are really gripping and nice. You know, the way you write, your writing style and everything is so nice.
Thank you.
I also would love to write the way you write. So what makes you, how do ideas come up, and how do you, write things on different aspects? Although the first one was Bankrupt was also on a similar line, but the story she wrote was a different kind of a story, and that was also gripping. So how do you get these ideas, and how do you, put into your thoughts into writing, and what is your style of writing, and how do you manage to, do you write maybe 2,000 words, or the other author was saying, I write 2,000 words in a day. So how do you write? Is it as and when the ideas come to you, do you write? Or you write, do you have a plan to write? Or how do you go about
See,
it?
when I start writing a book, or when I decide to start writing a book, it has to be a topic which interests me. It has to be something which, one, I don't know much about, and I also want to start reading about. So when I wrote the book on bitcoins, bitcoins was a topic which interested me. When I wrote about the Padmanabha Swami temple, it was a subject that interested me. When I wrote about demonetization, it was a subject that interested me at that point in time. So it has to be something. Look, when you write a book, it takes you about a year to write a book. So you have to pick a topic which you're not only interested at that point in time, but you know that it will hold your interest for the next 12 months. Because there's no point beginning to write about it and then losing interest in a couple of months. Two, I never write the entire plot in advance. So I always write from chapter to chapter. So it keeps my learning process intact. Three, the book for me is as much a learning as it is for you. So in terms of assuming that you're chapter 10 of 45th page or 50th page or 100th page, what you know at that point in time is what I know in my process of discovery. So it just adds to the fun element for me and to the excitement for the reader. So as far as you're concerned, I think if you want to write a topic, I'm sure you already would have made a choice of what you want to write about, right? So
I would slightly beg to differ here, because if you see in a creative, when you're creative, you have different aspects, which just clicks. Like maybe a social setting, or maybe a religious setting, or maybe something, relating to artificial intelligence, something innovative. So many kind of ideas you keep,
yeah, but the point is you will not be able to write books on all of them, right? So you have to pick and choose topics that you would want to write about, and something which you feel very strongly about. For example, when I wrote a book on If God Was a Banker, it's a story about two people in a bank, and one of them is a guy who takes all the wrong means to success, and one takes all the right ways to success. Now, I had seen that happening in a particular organization, and I felt very strongly about it. So I felt strongly enough to write a book about it and make it into a story. When I started reading about Padmanabha Swami temple, the entire story came on the front page of newspapers. I found it very intriguing that here's a subject, here is a, I started feeling that here's a topic about a temple which has got $20 billion in wealth, which possibly is even richer than the Vatican, and yet nobody talks about it in books and stories. So I started writing about that book and did a fair bit of research which involved me going to the temple, meeting taxi drivers and auto walas outside the temple, and getting some stories from them. So somewhere I think those are the things which touch you, the things which influence you, the things which you don't know much about are elements which make a very good story. But for that you also have to have a keen sense of observation, and I would recommend whenever you notice these things in life, just write a small mail to yourself and just send it to a mailbox. So that tomorrow, 2 years down the line, when you want to incorporate them into your stories, you can actually go back and visit that mailbox. You will have tons of stories already there in those mailbox. Pull them out and adapt them to your books, which is what I always do.
Absolutely. If you see, I agree with you. And in fact, the news, if you, earlier we were told that you must watch news, you must hear news. nowadays we don't want our children to be listening to all the negative news.
Absolutely.
So it's totally a different kind of a change, you know. So I guess, yes, you're right, that, you know, whatever things you feel so strongly about, you should do.
Correct.
That's a very nice word.
Thank you.
Having said that, I think the news is from where you've got your most inspiration for all your books.
Yes.
That's how it has all begun. And it's a snippet somewhere that has spurred you and then moved into a book on the Padmanabh temple.
Yeah, correct. So, yeah, you should not take news negatively, but having said that, I think, yeah, news today gives you a lot of fodder for writing stories.
Absolutely.
Which is what I do.
Yeah. My first book too came from one little snippet about a body found in the creek behind my house. So I owe a lot to news too. Any more questions?
Okay, great.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Ravi,
you very much,
for lovely.
guys. It's a pleasure meeting you.